I'm Shea Oliver, science fiction and horror writer. Welcome to Shea Reads Horror Stories. Today I'm reading one of my original horror stories, The Cannibal in the Morgue. It's the story of a medical examiner who has a unique taste for human flesh, and he discovers something when he tries a human heart. The paramedics flop the disfigured body awkwardly onto the examination table, chuckling and yapping rudely about the damage the steering wheel had inflicted upon her misshapen fake breast. Dr. Marcus Aurelio shooed the obnoxious paramedics out of his morgue. Such vile attitudes toward auto accident victims, indeed any victim, was not to be tolerated. To an untrained eye, the cause of her death might appear obvious. After all, if your car slams into a brick wall at 90 miles per hour, you're very likely to die. However, an accident like that also raises questions. Detective Flamalo ordered the autopsy of Marta Sky-Kaskaminski immediately. Once the door had sealed behind the paramedics, Dr. Aurelio began his work. His hands moved automatically, positioning the body on the table correctly, snipping away quickly to remove bloodied clothing, and drawing samples of bodily fluids. His magnifying glass moved meticulously, scrutinizing every inch of the poor naked woman. With nothing more than Detective Flamalo's "something feels off, I don't think that this is just an accident" to work from, Dr. Aurelio committed to being extra thorough. He wheeled the instruments of his trade next to the body, selecting his favorite scalpel to begin. "Perfect," he mouthed as he ran his left hand over the mangled body. The song of his scalpel sang its opening lines, followed by an odious symphony of savaging instruments, bone saw, forceps, scissors, and the like. Organs extracted and weighed, more samples collected, as each step of the process meticulously dictated into the microphone hanging from the ceiling. Detective Flamalo gagged gratingly as she walked into the morgue, glaring at him. "Smells like hell itself in here," she proclaimed while attempting to suppress a cough. "And you look like the devil himself. You are the sloppiest butcher I have ever seen." Dr. Aurelio looked down at his scrubs, chuckling to himself at the unknown irony in her words. Blood and bits of the woman formed grotesque patterns where the various power instruments had scattered them. His sleeves were coated black, almost to the elbows from bodily fluids and blood. "We'll know for sure when the lab test results come back," Dr. Aurelio announced tritely as he tried to brush some of the drying bits from his chest. "Everything here points to massive blunt force trauma, with the damage to the head the likely immediate cause of death." Detective Flamalo turned and rushed to the door. "Let me know when you have the lab results and clean this place up." Dr. Aurelio followed her, but only to the door. When he was certain she was gone, he opened the door and looked down the long hospital basement corridor. Empty. He peeled off his latex gloves and picked up his large gym bag. The stench of sweat made his nose scrunch as he dug beneath the damp, musty workout clothes. The soft-sided cooler fit perfectly snug in the bottom of the bag and had more than enough room if he didn't get too greedy. He carefully carved a small, fist-sized chunk of muscle from the woman's mangled thigh, removed her entire left bicep, and carefully dissected what could become two perfect roasts from her hindquarters. One of the kidneys and the liver joined the muscles inside the cooler. He returned to his official duties and replaced all the other organs in her body, except for the heart. The woman's heart was gorgeous, thought Dr. Aurelio, as if such a thing can be said about a heart. He never tried heart before. There's a first for everything. He packed it into the cooler gingerly and replaced the cooler in the bottom of his gym bag. Clumps of gauze and other pliable trash were replaced for missing muscle. His overly pristine stitches closed the lacerations, hiding any evidence that elements from the inside were missing. It didn't matter that much. A closed casket or cremation was more than likely, so the risk was minimal and acceptable. "Chianti, or maybe a nice Merlot," pondered the doctor out loud absent-mindedly as he made his way down the wine aisle. The vegetables, baguette, and oyster sauce were already in his cart. "Vegetarian or vegan?" asked the colorfully dressed, lanky woman as her spindly fingers poked at the cash register. He stared at the unevenly stained, hand-crocheted Rasta sack of a hat she'd chosen to hide her greasy, unkempt hair. "I'm a butcher," he replied in a monotone voice. I get my meat from a very select source. Whatever, man, the wannabe hippie cashier replied as she handed him his receipt. He became more and more agitated by that grocery store clerk as he drove home. What nerve she had to insinuate anything negative about someone who eats meat, especially a discerning gastronome such as himself. He noted to himself to complain to the manager on his next shopping trip. Upon returning to his drab, nondescript house buried in a sea of interchangeable tract homes, Dr. Arillo donned a black masculine apron and began unpacking his groceries from his shopping bag and his freshly carved indulgences from his gym bag's hidden cooler. Dr. Arillo meticulously washed the vegetables, setting them to dry on a washable bamboo paper towel, and placed the bottle of Merlot in the refrigerator to chill slightly. Red wine should be served a few degrees below room temperature, especially when enjoyed with a fine meal. Each of the delicacies that he'd brought home from the morgue, except for the heart, were carefully washed, patted dry, placed into freezer-safe bags, vacuum-sealed, and labeled with the precise contents and the name, Marta Sky Kosminski. He cubed the beautiful heart and tossed the pieces in a bowl with balsamic vinegar, salt, and olive oil. He then set it aside to marinate while he uncorked the wine. Wonderful of you to provide me an entire week of exquisite dinners, my love. He spoke gently to the items as he placed them gently in the freezer. I promise to make each dish a spectacular experience. The small cubes of her heart sizzled as they hit the bubbling butter in the hot frying pan. Thinly sliced sweet potatoes followed, along with onions and carrots. A bit of wine was added, along with garlic, cumin, coriander, and thyme. He dimmed the lights in the dining room and prepared the fine china and good silver. The aroma of the meal spread throughout the house, making him eager for the start of the meal as he finished the first glass of wine. Once the dish was fully cooked, it was carefully plated and joined another slightly fuller glass of wine on the white linen tablecloth. Spectacular, mouthed Dr. Arillo in between gentle bites of his homemade feast. After he gingerly mopped up the remaining spots of sauce on his plate with a slice of baguette, he leaned back in his chair to enjoy the aftertaste of such an exquisite main course. The remainder of the wine filled only a tiny portion of the glass, but it would be enough. He selected a very special dark chocolate truffle that he'd saved for a special occasion from the crystal dish in the middle of the table. A somber thought raced across his conscience, and he stood up before taking the last bite of the chocolate. He raised his wine glass and proposed a toast. To my dear lover, for that is what we now are, that I have your heart. May your spirit rest in eternal peace on the dark side of this vale of life. He gingerly swallowed the last of his wine and relished the final bite of his truffle. Once the dishes were washed and the kitchen cleaned, Dr. Arillo crawled into bed. I'm telling you for the last time, articulated Dr. Arillo with an icy, impatient glare. Blunt force trauma. You know, a nasty car accident. Do you have the test results back? Detective Flamallo replied, trying to remain calm while gagging on the terrible smell in the morgue. Did this man never hear of bleach and elbow grease? Dr. Arillo felt his agitation level grinding higher with every passing moment and every asinine question. The night before had been spent tossing and turning, awakened way too many times by fleeting memories of horrid nightmares. Such mental annoyances had not happened since he was a child. Dealing with this overly eager detective was not on his short list of tolerable activities for the day. No, all of the results will not be back anytime soon, he stated exasperatedly. You know, as well as I do, that the lab is backed up, understaffed, and everything they do is being scrutinized. What could he say to make this irritant leave? He was in no mood to deal with her. The detective asked to see the body again. Fine, he said, rolling his eyes, gritting his teeth, and yanking open the cooler drawer. The sliding tray banged hard against its stop, shifting the woman's body roughly. She gazed at the body, exhaling sharply through her nose. Could you please get a clean sheet to cover her with? Snapped the detective while pulling the stained sheet down from the victim's face. She was more than an accident victim in the detective's mind. Something felt fishy, but without evidence, she was hamstrung. "I'll be back tonight at 7:30 with the husband," announced the detective. "He wants to see, so anything you can do to make her face look," she stuttered, "more presentable?" "Fine," he spoke again, finding his irritation oddly waning as he spoke the word, despite the realization that he was giving up part of his evening for this. "I'll be here." As Detective Flamolo escorted Jonathan Sky Kosminski to his wife's covered corpse, Dr. Orillo could feel his pulse accelerating, deep in his soul, a knot formed and began pulling at the edges of his reality. The chilled air sucked into his lungs returned to the room, heated from the inferno boiling inside. The doctor knew this man intimately, despite never laying eyes on him before. Dr. Orillo watched Detective Flamolo's lips move, but a fog of betrayal seeped into the pores of his consciousness, fanning the flames of growing anger. He knew that she was explaining the brutality of the accident and giving the husband a graceful exit, should he choose. The husband shook his head definitively without emotion or expression. The moment the woman's face was uncovered, Dr. Orillo's gaze drilled into Sky Kosminski's eyes. The medical examiner found himself trying to read beneath the man's pupils, to measure the malice in his soul and assess the value of his life. The doctor began to lean forward, moving closer and closer to the victim's husband as he stared compassionately at his dead spouse. The doctor was no plastic surgeon, but he'd made her look less distorted than when she arrived in his basement laboratory. The crushed cheekbone, broken jaw, and numerous lacerations were impossible to completely disguise, but he'd done his best. Sky Kosminski began to speak, but Dr. Orillo couldn't hear the words. The rage tightened in his guts, pulling entrails and muscles together violently, and Dr. Orillo could feel his hands knotting into tight fists. He knew that the detective continued to speak, but couldn't see her through the murky blur that had covered everything in his sight, save Sky Kosminski. Not a single word of their conversation pierced the veil of fury boiling inside the doctor. Nothing but a driving, intensifying rage passed through the doctor's thoughts. Dr. Orillo drew in a huge breath, preparing to strike down this monster standing before him. "Doctor!" The detective's words broke the trance in which he found himself consumed. "Please cover her back up." He glared at the pair as they left the morgue, angry and confused. Sky Kosminski's was a terrible human and didn't deserve to live. He knew this as one knows the color of one's own eyes. But why? He stumbled into the tiny morgue restroom, closing his eyes and bending over to splash cold water onto his face. The paper towel felt cheap and flimsy as he stood back up. One look into the mirror caused him to crash backward, horrified, flopping against the wall and floundering to the floor. The person who looked back at him in the mirror wasn't him. It was the victim's reflection, with open, angry eyes glaring into his. The tiles on the floor felt cold. He traced his finger along the grout, trying to find his sanity in a mantra of tracing the perfectly spaced shapes. Lack of sleep. That was it. The previous night's rough nightmares and horrifying visions of hell caused all this. He needed a nap. The anger and hatred felt toward Jonathan Sky Kosminski stemmed from the twisted neurons in his mind that had failed to receive the daily reprieve they required. On his hands and knees, Dr. Orillo crawled from the restroom, half expecting to see Marta, Sky Kosminski, standing next to the cooler, looking down on him as he groveled along the floor. He stood up, his legs still unsteady, and his breath firing in staccato gasps. The accident victim remained covered on the table. Dr. Orillo began walking to the door when he heard his own name. The sound came from behind him, from a distant, quiet place, but he heard it. He spun again, expecting to see her standing. The room remained unchanged. The silence in the room began penetrating into him as he scanned the shadows, still half expecting a ghost to materialize. His body shook with a chill, and goosebumps sprang forth from every inch of his skin when he heard it again. Marcus Orillo. The sound that hung in the air was a woman's voice, soft yet harsh, cold yet demanding. His shiver transformed into shaking as he felt his feet betray him and began walking deeper back into the room. "Marcus Aurelio," it hissed again as he stepped back into the restroom. He clamped his eyes shut, terrified as his hands planted themselves on each side of the mirror. "Marcus Aurelio. Marcus Aurelio." He felt air move across his face as if somebody was speaking too close. "Run," he screamed inside at himself. "Flee with all your might." But he remained frozen in place as the voice chanted his name. "See me, Marcus Aurelio," the voice demanded. "See me." Using all of his strength, he clamped his eyes shut. Nothing in this world could force him to face the horror accosting his ears and thoughts. A crack of light slipped into his vision. He fought the sensation, but something was prying his eyes open without touching them. "No, no, no," he screamed as the pressure continued to push his eyelids upward. He fought with all of the will he could muster, his body shaking harder with each passing moment. She stared directly into his eyes from the mirror. Fire and fury burned deep behind her piercing gaze. Her broken jawbone clenched in a crooked rage. His eyes felt a searing heat as she roughly inhaled and exhaled. A mist slithered through the air, through his hair with each breath, breaking forth from her cracked and broken teeth. Everything went dark as he fell unconscious to the floor. The chilly night air felt even colder with each attack of the howling wind upon the trees, their branches crying out with painful creaks as they bent. Clouds rushed across the sky in a mosaic of racing patterns, revealing and hiding the full moon, creating a dancing monotone light across the landscape. Dr. Aurelio moved as quietly as he could through the shadows between the houses, stealing his way into the backyard. His mental state was a haggard, surreal haze, as if he was watching himself slip through life without control and without conscious thought. He pushed at the thin border of his imprisoned reality, unable to tell if he was dreaming or hallucinating. Somehow he knew that the back door to the garage would be unlocked. It had broken some time ago, but he knew Jonathan Sky Kaminsky found other activities more appealing than home repair. Slipping into the pitch black of the garage, Dr. Aurelio set his gym bag down while he waited for his eyes to adjust. The latex gloves felt more comfortable than they usually did, and a smile crept across his face. They were as comfortable as the black ski mask he wore to hide his pale skin in the dark. Thoughts of what was coming pushed his heart to beat faster, the rhythmic pounding growing louder in his ears, propelling him to action. He placed the ladder under the garage door opener, climbed up and removed the light bulbs. After replacing the ladder, he selected an aluminum bat from the bin in the corner containing sports equipment from Jonathan Sky Kaminsky's teenage years. The darkness and shadows hid Dr. Aurelio perfectly as the garage door began climbing up its rails. The clouds embraced the moon, chasing any ambient light into the heavens. Sky Kaminsky opened his car door. "Fucking shitty, cheap-ass light bulbs, always burning out." He angrily slammed the door. "I'll buy ones that fucking work rather than the cheap shit she always bought." The guttural chuckle emanating from the man's lungs polluted the air in the garage, igniting a blaze of anger in Dr. Aurelio's chest as he crept through the shadows. The bat rang out like a church bell as it smashed into Sky Kaminsky's head. Dr. Aurelio clicked on his flashlight and rapidly examined the man's skull, letting out a sigh of relief. No blood, no spatter. He felt for a pulse. The vein pressed back in rhythm against the doctor's fingers. Working quickly, Dr. Aurelio retrieved the body bag from his gym bag, rolled Sky Kaminsky into the bag, and zipped it to the man's torso. A brief gasp left the man's body as he struggled to find his way back to consciousness. Dr. Aurelio removed the belt from his pants as rapidly as he could, wrapping it around Sky Kaminsky's neck and cinching it tight. The man's eyes popped open in fright as he realized that he was unable to breathe. His first reaction was to grab for his neck, but his arms flailed uselessly against the constricting body bag. The clouds released the moon from their darkening embrace, and a stream of light pulsed into the garage. Terror melted into confusion and panic in Skye Kosminski's eyes as life passed into death. With Jonathan Skye Kosminski's body in the trunk of his car, Dr. Arillo backed out of the garage, pressed the remote control, smiled, and drove away. A light rain began falling as Dr. Arillo pulled into the Graverly family mortuary. Only one working parking lot light of 5 illuminated a far corner of the pavement. The pitch-black interior of the building refused to be penetrated as lightning painted the dark clouds. With the car hidden by the rear employee entrance of the building, Skye Kosminski's body thudded onto the old rusting gurney, carelessly left outside to be gnawed upon by the elements. The doctor's consciousness searched frantically for the passage to escape this torturous experience of watching his life unfold without any means to direct or control what he was doing. He knew where he was, he knew what he planned to do, and he battled for control of the path that he was compelled to follow. He pulled off his ski mask and smiled toward the security camera. Having worked there a few years before, he knew that the camera was a fake. Mr. Graverly was a terribly cheap bastard. A fake rock near the door hid a door key because the old forgetful owner would often leave his at home. The gurney squeaked as Dr. Arillo tugged it down the hallway. From memory, he knew to turn left and then enter the last door. One large stainless steel piece of equipment dominated the room. The aging crematorium continued to show signs of neglect. The cheap owner found no reason to instruct his employees to clean anything beyond what customers would see. The gurney left trails on top of the trails already drawn in the fine dust on the floor. Dr. Arillo opened the crematorium door and wheeled the gurney into position, ready to shove the body into the oven. Sweat dripped down his forehead. Murder is an exhausting business, especially when you can only watch yourself commit the heinous act. As he let out another deep breath, he attacked the edges of his sanity, wrenching back the veil that left him rudderless and separated him from his own soul. "This isn't a dream," he spoke out loud. He felt his consciousness being besieged once again by the force that controlled and fought back with all his remaining energy. "I really killed him." His fingers ran through his hair, digging at his scalp, tearing at the edges of his sanity. He pulled with the last bit of emotion that remained within him, yanked open his own spirit, and crawled back inside. He closed his eyes and opened them again. Nothing had changed. The dead man's body remained. He rushed to the nearest restroom, flipped on the light, and stared into the mirror. As his fatigued reflection stared helplessly back at him, the pale reflection of Marta Skye Kosminski, broken and distorted image, inked itself across his own face in the mirror. "What have you done to me?" he demanded. "My lover, you have my heart and have done my bidding," she replied, sending a frigid shiver down his spine. "I am avenged." Her reflection faded further away, leaving him looking at his own face. Dr. Arillo's emotions ricocheted through his being, smashing into one another and bewildering him further. Anger flared hotly in his chest, knowing that she'd used him as a pawn. Panic and fear spread through him as he considered the criminal repercussions of killing a man. Yet, satisfaction and self-righteousness cradled his moral core, knowing he'd served justice. The man in the mirror watched as a gnarled smile and focused eyes emerged from the befuddled face. An idea was sneaking across his mind, infusing a delicious finality to this demented drama. He stepped back into the crematorium's room with a smile and a large blade in his hand. Not the appropriate tool, but it would do. The blade sliced through the abdomen, just below the man's rib cage, leaving a wide tear from one side of his body to the other. Pressing the stomach down, Dr. Arillo drove the knife up into the diaphragm, making a hole large enough for his forearm. Jonathan Sky Kaminsky's heart looked dark and cold in his hand as he pulled it from the oozing gash in the man's torso. The doctor's nefarious grin grew wider, even as he opened his mouth to bite into the raw, blood-drenched muscle. The acidic and metallic taste of blood mixed with the bitter, sinewy muscle with each bite. As he devoured the last morsel of the life-sustaining organ, he longed for a glass of Merlot, to wash down the aftertaste lingering in his mouth. His laugh filled the room as he gently stroked the dead man's face. Not long now. He pushed the body into the crematorium's open mouth, using long paddles to ensure that the body was fully extended. After closing and locking the oven door, he pressed the full cycle button. Before dawn, only ashes would remain in the incinerator. The mortuary owner and employees would blame one another for the mess, if they even noticed it. The rain quickened its pace, pounding down angrily as Dr. Arillo pushed the gurney back into the dark night, each raindrop striking the tiny pools and stains of Sky Kaminsky's blood as if the drops hated the man as much as his wife's dead spirit hated him. Despite the apparent violence wrought upon the gurney, Dr. Arillo remained in the watery torrent, letting the heavenly downpour scrub his sins away. It felt cleansing and rewarding to feel the baptism of nature submerge him in a freshly clean psyche, unobstructed by the vengeful shade that controlled earlier. With his consciousness refreshed and confident in his own ability to hold tight to his own spirit, Dr. Arillo stepped back inside and walked fearlessly through the dark to the filthy employee restroom. A single fluorescent bulb fought valiantly to illuminate the small, dank room, but flickered defensively as darkness returned the attack. Dr. Arillo peered deeply into his own eyes in the mirrors, waiting. As the eyes looked back at him, began to grow wider and frightened. He knew the rest of the face in the mirror would change. Within moments, Dr. Arillo's reflection faded, replaced by the terrified face of Jonathan Sky Kaminsky. "What have you done?" demanded Sky Kaminsky. "You murdered her," replied Dr. Arillo, with unassailable satisfaction flowing through his entire being. He didn't know exactly how the husband killed his wife, and it didn't matter. Any desire for justification or need for evidentiary proof fled away from him, superseded by the certain knowledge of the man's guilt that Marta, Sky Kaminsky's spirit, infused into him. She, he replied in terror, desperately pleading to share his pitiful excuse, but a force began pulling Jonathan Sky Kaminsky deeper, twisting his spirit further into the darkness of the mirror. "No, no, no," he screamed. "She's here!" Dr. Arillo breathed a deep, refreshing breath as he stepped into the rain. A case of Merlot. I think that's what I'm going to need. Hope you enjoyed that. Go grab yourself a glass of wine, kick back, and find something else fun to read. And until next time, have a great week.